Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Vancouver Resource Investment Conference channel. My name is Jesse Day. We're counting down to the next VRIC, January 21st and 22nd. There's a link in the description below where you can get your tickets. But we are, of course, bringing the VRIC to you with our series of online expert panels. And I am very excited today because I have two of my favorite people to talk to. We've got Marc Faber, the publisher of the Gloom, Boom, and Doom report, and the Economic Ninja, host of the Economic Ninja YouTube channel. Gentlemen, it's an honor to have you both on the show.
Well, thank you very much for having me, and I look forward to this discussion.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jesse. I'm really excited to be here with you and Marc.
Yeah, I'm excited to have both of you on. So I want to start with a broad question, and that is, when you look across the economic, political, and geopolitical landscape right now at this point in time, what has you most concerned that you think people should be paying more attention to? And Marc, I'll start with you on this one.
Well, you can be concerned about just everything, but I was just reading a Bloomberg column, and there is an economist, and he predicts that in a year's time, the 10 years Treasury yield will decline to below 2.5%. And then I looked further into the matter, and I saw a Bank of America survey of portfolio managers, fund managers. 70% of them expect lower interest rates in the next 12 months, which is a very high level of bullish consensus about interest rates coming down. Now, the question is this: if they are right, what kind of conditions does that bring about in financial markets and in the economy? I mean, I'm not saying it's impossible that interest rates drop sharply, but under what conditions would that happen? Obviously, it would have to be a weak economy globally with very low credit demand and with inflation coming down meaningfully. And then we have to ask ourselves, how realistic is that? Because recent wage settlements with the automobile manufacturers were like for 10% increase annually. And there is pressure on wages everywhere in the world and still pressure on prices. And secondly, we have to ask ourselves, what about if interest rates don't go down and everybody's wrong and the interest rates just keep on going up? And that is a concern investors should have about their positions in stocks and in bonds, because stocks have been rallying strongly over the last 2-3 weeks. And if interest rates do not go down, but happen to go up, and we don't know for sure which direction they will go, then obviously the valuations may be on the high side. So this would be my concern. And secondly, even if interest rates drop to around 2.5% on the 10 years Treasury, what happens thereafter? Because in the 70s, we had 3 instances of interest rates declining by about 50%, but thereafter they went up again to new highs, and the final high was in 1981 in September, with the 10 years over 15%. So this would be one of the kind of economic concerns I would be preoccupied with.
And Ninja, what is your take on the main concerns you have when you look out across the world? There's kind of a changing geopolitical order. We have out of control debt in not only the US, but in many places around the world. And maybe if you could follow up with Marc's comments on interest rates and where you see them headed as well.
Yeah, actually, my answer is very close to Marc's, and that is normalcy bias. You see, the problem with interest rates and Fed funds rates in the last, let's say, since the year 2000 or 1999, we have seen artificially low rates. And that is what it took to pump that bubble up in our monetary system that much more. But the problem with that is, and we'll put aside for a second the 2003 to 2005 Fed rate hike cycle. We have most of our investors now, we're going from baby boomers that are getting older and they are finding their amazing life, their retirement years, and they're moving out of that investment cycle. And we're getting younger people that are growing up in this cycle of ultra low rates. And they don't understand what happens when either the rug's pulled out from under them, like what happened in 2003 to 2005 with the Fed raising rates. What happens when a government like Germany's all of a sudden starts to crash and we see reverberations around the world? They don't understand also what's happening in reality is the world's walking away from the dollar, usage of the dollar. So that means there's fewer people buying our bonds or treasuries. And so that raises rates as well. We have for the first time a divergence from the Federal Reserve raising rates and the 10-year going up on its own simply because people that need to raise money, whether it be governments or corporations, they are needing to pay higher rates because everybody doesn't want to put their money in for a certain amount of time and lock it up at a certain rate if they believe that rates are going higher. So we have this cycle that really has never happened before, in my opinion. I'm sure I could be wrong, but I always have equated this to the mid 70s, what happened in the 70s with interest rates as inflation was going up. But people don't understand that when rates go down, and they are asking, they're hoping, they're praying for rates to go down. But like Mark said, rates go down when things are happening in the economy poorly, when stocks are plunging, when real estate valuations are going down. And the only reason the Fed would want to drive rates down is two reasons. They want to stimulate the economy because nobody can afford anything, debt, as far as debt is concerned. And then they're trying to, and people are diving into bonds as a safe haven. The scary thing is bonds aren't a safe haven right now. It seems like right now we're in quite a bond bursting cycle right now. I don't think we've seen 3 years of negative returns in bonds since the 1700s, late 1700s to early 1800s. So that's what's concerning to me, that there's too many people gambling or betting that interest rates are going to go down, and you don't realize that when that happens, it's because most people are wiped out of the credit markets, and most banks are not lending like they did just a mere couple years prior to that.
Excellent comments from both of you there. I would like to hone in on inflation here because it seems like wherever you look across the world, inflation has taken a massive toll on the middle class and an even bigger one on those already in poverty. I say this living in the Balkans. I spend my time in Croatia and Serbia, and these people have unfortunately been crushed by rising inflation when a lot of these people were already in poverty. So I'm wondering if maybe you could provide some perspective on why inflation has spread globally in the way that it has. Do you expect this trend to continue? And what does that mean for the global middle class? And Ninja, I'll go to you first on this one.
All right. So it's really interesting to me when you ask people what causes inflation. 9 out of 10 people will tell you it's excessive money printing, but that's just not the case. That's not always the case. During the quantitative easing cycle after the great financial crisis, when the Fed and the government was printing a lot of money, the reason why we didn't see that hyperinflation, because the velocity of money wasn't there. They were buying up assets, securitizing debt, and they were holding it, and it didn't go anywhere. So we didn't see that increase. Inflation is merely prices going up. And right now, the main driver of prices going up are the costs of debt, the costs of doing business. Everything is going up, and it trickles down to Main Street America. The middle class getting wiped out actually scares the heck out of me, because when you wipe out the middle class's wealth, that's when countries can go from democracies to dictatorships real quick. And I believe that the one thing that is very important that people need to realize is that the government right now is printing money excessively. I think the US government sold $1.1 trillion of the bonds in Q3. I believe that you're going to see a month in 2024 where there's $1 trillion in a month. That number even shocked Wall Street when that happened, in July or August. And the reality is our government understands too that other governments aren't coming to buy our debt, and they need to fund wars. They need to fund the factories that are being built, hoping to try and get semiconductor chip factories over here, because this world is splitting into two economies, the Western economy and the BRICS nations. And this is something that still blows my mind that the average person doesn't know about. But everyone, I said 2 years ago, are going to become experts in inflation. in about a year and a half, 2 years, everyone's going to be an expert in the BRICS nations. But the sad thing is you only become an expert when it's too late. The mainstream doesn't flow into that knowledge until it's affecting the mainstream. And it just hasn't happened yet. Inflation's affecting everyone, but it's like the normalcy bias again. They just go, well, inflation's here to stay. It's just going to be like this. It's not going to be. We're going to have spikes of deflation in certain asset classes. And then eventually everything deflates, that bubble pops, and we restart that cycle again.
And Mark, your thoughts on the cause of inflation globally and how it could continue to impact citizens across the world, particularly those middle class and lower income aspects of society.
Well, I agree that inflation is not caused only by money and by the increase in the quantity of money, but mostly it is actually the caused by an increase in the quantity of money by the money supply. And we have to be very careful when we talk about inflation, because when the prices of potatoes and of strawberries and of, at the supermarkets go up, it's a consumer price inflation. But we also have asset inflation. Say when the prices of homes go up, and they go up far more than the salaries and the wages of people, then at some point there is an affordability issue. And the affordability for homes among young people and among, let's say, people of not the 10% richest and highest earnings American is severely diminished at the present time. In other words, the demand for homes would be there, but the affordability isn't, because prices have gone up so much. And that is a sort of inflation that is not desirable as well, because it lowers the standards of living. I mean, to put it bluntly, when I was joining the labor force in precisely 1970, when I started to work on Wall Street, my salary was relatively high compared to home prices. And it was relatively high compared to the value of a Dow Jones Industrial, which in 1970 was on the way to 730. That was the low. So at the present time, someone who is young, he earns less interest on his bonds than I earned at the time in 1970. He pays a much higher price for a house in terms of hours that he has to work to acquire that house. And he also has to work many more hours than I had to work at the time to buy a Dow Jones Industrial. So that is an important point to remember. When consumer prices go up, it's a symptom of inflation, but it's not the cause of inflation. And the symptom can also be rising stocks, rising bond prices, rising collectible prices, rising all kinds of assets like real estate and commodities and so forth. And two, inflation is a tax. Inflation occurs in countries that have fiscal deficits. Normally in a country that wouldn't have a fiscal deficit, you would have, even with money printing, probably not much inflation. But in countries that have a large fiscal deficit, you have inflation. And the reason why countries have fiscal deficits is that ordinary people don't know that inflation is actually a tax on them. And it is a welcome tax by the rich people, by the affluent class, because it hurts, as you just mentioned, the lower income recipients and the middle class the most. And that's why in countries where you live, and also in Thailand, say, when there is inflation, The wealthy people are not suffering. I mean, Bill Gates and Elon Musk and so forth, and Jeff Bezos, they actually benefit from inflation. Because during inflationary times, you have, in real terms, a negative real interest rates. And so stocks continue to go up. Like in the 70s, stocks didn't crash. What crashed was eventually the US dollar. But when the dollar collapses, and I would expect the dollar to go down if, say, we went down on the 10 years back to around 2.5% yield. When the dollar goes down, the rich people don't suffer as much because they have the ability to shift money into other currencies or into precious metals and so forth. But poor people don't have that opportunity, and they wouldn't know how to do it. So again, it's the middle class and the lower classes that get hurt the most.
What's up, guys? Quick break. My name is Jay Martin. I'm the CEO of Cambridge House and the host of the Vancouver Resource Investment Conference. I wanted to quickly point your attention to a link right beneath this video where you can subscribe to our new weekly newsletter. If you want to better understand the minds of the best investors in the resource space, subscribe to this newsletter. I author it personally every Sunday, and I love writing it. Hit that link below to subscribe. All right, back to the interview.
Very well said. And I want to turn from matters of economics to matters of civil liberties and personal freedoms. Always love talking to you about that, Mark, and Ninja as well. And I want to talk about the WHO Pandemic Accord, which is quietly being put together in the background with a goal of being finalized in May of 2024. Tedros Adhanom, the Director General of the WHO, is repeatedly saying on social media that another pandemic is just around the corner, and now is the time to make sure to be prepared. And if we don't do this, it will spell disaster for humanity, and on and on and on. Do you think there's anything nefarious behind this WHO Pandemic Accord, which seems to give sweeping powers to the WHO in the case of a pandemic being declared? Or is the WHO actually trying to help us? And Mark, I'll go to you first on this one.
Well, I suppose that when the WHO was formed, that the objective was to help countries and help people, you know, in cases of diseases and pandemics and so forth. But as in most organizations, the organization is sooner or later hijacked by undesirable elements that use then the organization as a way to control people and to sort of enslave people. And you talk about the pandemic, like the coronavirus and so forth. I don't think that this was a pandemic. I think it was a pandemic. In other words, there was a plan, and to essentially reduce the freedom of people. And it was probably an experiment to lock in people and see whether people are so dumb as to let themselves force to be vaccinated and so forth. Now, I happen to think, and as you earlier pointed out, that we have two worlds, the BRICS countries and the Western industrialized nations. I believe that the BRICS countries, and I would include the BRICS countries, the poor countries in the world, the developing world, that would make up for close to 90% of the global population, including India, China, Indonesia, Pakistan, Brazil, and so forth. These countries, in my view, they don't believe in the UN because they think the UN is an America-controlled institution. They don't believe in the IMF. They don't believe in the World Bank. And they are not great believer in the WHO. So this agreement of WHO to control sort of the world out of Washington, I think will fail. And you take a country like Thailand, one of the princesses, I mean, the daughter of the present king, got sick after taking the vaccine. So I don't think that they will implement, say, these measures in a country like Thailand. And in India, they had bad experiences with all sorts of vaccines that were offered by the Bill Gates Foundation. So, and this ditto for Africa and South Africa. So I think that there are big question marks about WHO. And even among intellectuals, a lot of intellectuals reject the tyrannical nature of WHO.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I welcome them to try where I'm located in the Balkans. It's not going to work out for them. Unfortunately, it will work out in my home country of Canada, where everybody literally bowed and folded to government regulations like they were the gospel from on high. So, Ninja, I'm wondering what your perspective is on this coming potential WHO pandemic accord. How worried should we be about it? And what are your thoughts in general on what the WHO has been doing?
Yeah, so I had the pleasure of knowing about the last pandemic way beforehand because I had a list of all the variants, the names, the dates they were going to come out. And in my career as a firefighter, I was out silly me warning my fellow firefighters about this, and they just didn't care. I tried running around to lots of people. This is before I had a YouTube channel. Um, I had the pleasure of reading Agenda 2016, 2020, and so on, and then watching these things come to pass, and then watching them get wiped off the internet. I've seen a lot of plans out on the internet that have come to pass, and I just did a video. Now you have to think I started a YouTube channel in the middle of, or right in the beginning of everything going to crap, and I started warning people. That channel got to where it was more viewed every day than CNN, and it's not bragging rights, it's CNN, but every day for a year and a half. I did a video in September about the next one coming, and I won't even say it out loud on this thing. I got my views knocked down 60% literally that week, and it was coincidentally around the time that the Supreme Court said that they're going to read the case, or going to hear the case of the White House that's meddling with social media and what they're stopping on social media. And ever since then, it's been completely dead. But what I did that video about was how important it is to realize there's a certain virus that they're already starting to plug in the media, and they're already wheeling out the bodies, they're covered and everyone's in suits in India, and how they did a mass drill in New York. And I showed how they did those exact same things, how they barely put it out mainstream at late at night. They squash the story, but it's out there. How they get the media to cover how they're doing these big drills throughout the world for this. And then they just, the WHO actually just named this virus as one of the 4 that could be the next one. And so the proof is that right after that video, everything on my channel stopped. And so, yeah, I do believe it's 100% planned. I honestly do not put a lot of credit in the Spanish flu of 1918, which caused the Depression of 1920, which most people don't even know existed, which led to rampant money creation through the 20s, the roaring 20s, leading to the Great Depression. If the middle class understood history a little bit better, I think they would have a much easier grasp on how to gain wealth. These are normal cycles, interest rate cycles, wealth cycles, real estate cycles. It's all a cycle. Ever since 1999, we've seen the Dow Jones be cut in half in its valuation twice. And everyone seems to tell me that this time is different. Well, when it comes to these groups that have all of a sudden came out of nowhere over the last 30, 40 years and have dubbed themselves the experts, people need to very seriously look back on history and look how governments and organizations, which aren't tied to governments, use fear to control the masses. And that's what truly scares me. And I think that's what people need to wake up to. The truth is, in my career, I watch people suffer from the after effects of what they've taken in response to that. And we have to pick our words carefully, and it's very sad, but it's the truth. And so, but it's so vitally important that we warn people, because just like I'm sure Mark has warned people about economic cycles, why it's important to guard your wealth during certain times and then dive in. But ironically, the wealthy people are always the opposite of the masses. Well, that's why they're wealthy. That's why Warren Buffett's pulling his money out right now. That's why Jeff Bezos and others are pulling their money out right now. It's just like what happened in 2006, 2007. But now we add in health and a very scary monster that you can't see. And people are losing faith and they don't even realize it. And their faith is too deep into the government mainstream media, in my opinion.
I completely agree with you there. I would like to shift to how to protect one's wealth, one's personal freedom. You know, it's funny, freedom is becoming a word being called out in mainstream media now for being far right ideology, which I can't help but crack up when saying that because it's just become so insane. In the sense that seeking freedom is now considered to be you're being selfish when it comes to a lot of the Western media. But how can people maintain their civil liberties and their freedom in our world today? Ninja, I'll go to you first on this one.
You know, this is going to sound probably totally out of left field, but I think people need to start businesses and not get into debt. Start businesses during a crash. It's the greatest time to build your own freedom because you make your own rules. We're in a society now that has become so incorporated that you are at the mercy of your supervisor, your boss, your corporation, and they can lead you, they can taunt you. The government set up a great scheme to where you give them your money pre-tax, and then they control you until retirement and even after that. I think that is one thing that's really important. But also, when we talk about just preserving our wealth, it's crazy just to look at the home Schiller gold to house price index and look at just since the 70s, we've had 3 peaks when gold took off in price as real estate values were plummeting. Mark talked about it earlier, where it gets serious when the average person can't afford a home. Well, that's happened many times before. As a matter of fact, it happened in the early 70s for a little bit until the Fed plunged the rates down around 1975, 1976, but then it got really scary and expensive in the early 80s. Now, when we look at that plunge, where gold goes higher and real estate goes lower, there's something interesting that has never happened since the late 60s. And that is gold for the last 5 or 6 years has on that chart, gold versus home prices has really held its ground and stayed flat. It blows my mind that gold is sitting at around $2,000 near the all-time highs during a panic, mind you, of 2009 to 2012. And home prices are this higher. I believe that number is going to absolutely blow people's mind as real estate turns and gold starts to pick up. And I know everybody, when I start talking about gold, they always want to go to Bitcoin because I've been invested in Bitcoin for a long time too. But I want to look at some stable things because crypto is so much in its infancy. But I really, Mark did say something that is very true. And he said the poor people don't understand currency valuations and how you can protect yourselves with currencies around the world and how you can move money around. But the one thing the poor can get is they can still go out to a coin shop and buy an ounce of gold or an ounce of silver. And if they could get out of their own heads the daily or monthly fluctuations in price and look at the long term, I think that is one of the most amazing opportunities on earth right now.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting because I convinced my wife's parents who are in Japan right now to buy themselves a little bit of gold, and how they're blown away by how it has protected their purchasing power already because the yen has done nothing but fall since then, gold screaming to all-time highs continuously in Japanese yen terms. So that kind of was a lesson that really clicked for them. Mark, what are your thoughts on, in this day and age, protecting one's, first of all, civil liberties and personal sovereignty? You're in Thailand. I'm in the Balkans. I came to this part of the world to get away from Canada, where civil liberties have been basically stripped away. So I'm wondering what your thoughts are on living as an expat abroad and how that kind of helps protect you, and anything you think that your average person would stand to understand when it comes to protecting their own personal freedoms.
Yes, I mean, I think this is a very thoughtful comment because most people, they say, yeah, freedom is the most important, but then they live a life where they enslave themselves. In other words, they have no savings, they have to wait for their wait at the end of the month to pay down their credit card debts, or they go on social media and they become addicted to having followers that follow them and so forth, or they put pictures up of themselves where they have been and where they eat and so forth, and being in the limelight or trying to be in the limelight, when actually freedom is exactly the opposite. You want to disappear. You know, you want to live in a small village, but not in a way that would arise, say, envy, or you don't want to show your wealth. You want to live like everybody else in modesty. And so I think that freedom is very difficult to define. I think I'm reasonably free in Thailand, where I live, but I'm not entirely free because I have to drive on the left side of the road, and I have to, go through immigration and custom controls and so forth and so on, and I cannot vote. So there is no such a thing as total freedom. If you enter the phase of civilization, your freedom goes down from the Stone Ages. But in the Stone Ages, you had other limitations. For instance, you may not have had much health care at the time. So it's philosophically seen a very difficult subject to define precisely what freedom is. Most people actually think they are free, when in reality they are in chains. But as I said, I think it's important, if you want to be or have some degree of independence, to remove your name from social media and so forth. And you have to sort of disappear. I mean, I have a friend who is very wealthy. He's a billionaire and he's below 40. He has disappeared. I mean, I'm in touch with him per email, and I quoted him once in my newsletter, but he said, "Mark, please don't do that. I don't want to have any publicity at all," and so forth. So this is what one should do: disappear from the CIA, disappear from the FBI. Just don't do things where people focus on you or pay attention to you.
Yeah, this is a very good point.
And secondly, I think you should live, in the case that we have this WHO criminal organization starting up another vaccine sort of pandemic. I think it would be important, like I live on a piece of land that is large enough, I could essentially feed myself. But you don't need to be able to feed yourself, but you should live in the countryside, in a small village, with sufficient water. You can survive easily a week without eating, but without water, it's tough. So near a source of water, in a small town or small village, where the inhabitants would trade with each other, like you have a carpenter and you have a butcher and you have a baker and so forth, and they can trade with each other and pay either through credit or through small denomination of gold. I mean, as an investment, you want to have a kilo of gold or 10 kilos or 100 kilos of gold. But in a case of emergency, you want to have coins of 2 grams, 5 grams, 10 grams, to very small denomination. So you can go to shop and the girl behind the counter will accept these coins because she will not be able to access a credit card or cryptocurrencies, because in an emergency situation, our kind governments that look so well after the interest of their citizens they'll switch off the light, switch off the electricity, and switch off the internet. I mean, it's a kind of a fantasy to believe that if the governments could lock you on, they will keep the internet on in a severe crisis or in a phase of them wanting to take over and dominate you.
Very well said. Some great points there, Ninja. You have a follow-up.
Yeah, I've got to add something because Mark's absolutely right. But a great example that just happened was not the government, the US government shutting down the internet and stopping those roadblocks. Let's use cryptocurrency as an example. Ripple has developed a blockchain that world governments around the world are coming to them to put their CBDCs on, to integrate with them. The US dollar is in peril right now because the SWIFT system is being challenged by the BRICS nations. So the US government, in their grand idea, and it worked great, all they did is they started a lawsuit against Ripple. And what that happened was around the world, companies like Coinbase and Gemini, they immediately stopped listing Ripple. They pulled it off, or XRP, I apologize. And what they did by just starting that lawsuit was stop all progress that was going on with that program around the world. You've just recently seen, as a judge came out and said that's not a security, that all these exchanges have started relisting it. But it's a prime example, like Mark says, the government can go as extreme as turning off the internet to, you've got a bunch of XRP and they don't like the way this is going around the world and it's challenging US dollar dominance or the SWIFT system. Okay, we're going to put a lawsuit and then strong arm exchanges around the world to delist it. It doesn't matter how much money you have in that one token or that one, cryptocurrency, it's dead in the water if you can't convert it, if you can't spend it. So Mark's example, a lot of people might think are extremes, but that's just an example of something that's not an extreme that worked. And when the governments are threatened, they will pull extremes, just like we've seen with governments around the world, strong arm corporations to force you to get something in your arm. That's where this personal sovereignty and all this thinking, you have to realize eventually it will get exactly to the point where Mark says, internet shut down. And remember, the internet was around for decades before it was available to the public. It was available for militaries. So he's absolutely right. And I think using that as an example can show you just how a government can control your money. And that's why you need to have money outside of the system.
Well, this has been such an incredible conversation, guys. I learned so much. It's everything I hoped it would be and more. Trust me, we have to do a part two to this one because I literally have another 40 minutes, an hour worth of questions for both of you. Before I do let you both go, Mark, could you tell us about the Gloom, Boom, and Doom report, what it is you do there and where people can find it?
Well, I wished I knew every time what I'm doing, but it's a report that tends to highlight unusual opportunities. And it's not a report who says buy A, B, C and sell X, Y, Z. But my reports try to stimulate investors' thinking. In other words, what is important to you? And the reports should also be read in that sense that it's not a guide exactly what you should do, but it's a guide of how you should think that you should do and go about your investments. So that's essentially the report.
Great. I'll put a link in the description below for that, for people who want to check it out. Ninja, tell us
Thank you very
about
much.
yeah, thank you. And Ninja, tell us about your YouTube channel and anywhere else you want to direct people online.
Yeah, I have two YouTube channels, The Economic Ninja, where I talk like a crazy person with cardboard notes. I try and use news articles, current events to show you, guide you where this next part of the cycle is headed. And then the Real Estate Ninja is really exploding because the downturn has started in real estate, mortgage rates exploding. I use my experience as owning a real estate brokerage. I sold all my homes, or 95% of my portfolio, in 2006 because I saw that crash coming. So I can use that example and what happened back then as to what's happening right now, just like Germany imploding.
Well, I will put links to both of those YouTube channels in the description below. Gentlemen, it's been great. Two of my favorite people, not only to get information from, but I think you're both wonderful human beings as well. So we greatly appreciate it. Part two at some point for sure. And thank you both for joining us on this panel.
Well, thank you very much for having us. Bye-bye.
Thanks so much, Jesse. Appreciate it.